Good afternoon and good morning to everybody out there, and welcome to today's Range 4 webcast. Today we're going to be talking about the DevOps Target Operating Model. I'm Helen, I am a Range 4 DevOpsologist, and I'll be leading the discussion today. The webcast will be about 30 minutes with some time for Q&A at the end, so if you use your Zoom control panel, if you have any questions, pop them in there at any time and I will come and take a look at the end of the session. So this is a question we love to ask the organisations that we work with. And it's a really important one when we're considering why we might want to do DevOps. So it really speaks to the importance of technology as a strategic change enabler for an organisation. We all know the stories about disruptors like Uber and Airbnb and things like that out there. But there's more companies that have more, if you like, traditional backgrounds that are starting to view themselves as a technology company. In the slides, there's a list of a few of them and some links to them. And you'll be surprised, I think, to see some of the names in there. So there's manufacturers like Coca-Cola, airlines like EasyJet in the UK and Alaska Airlines in the States. There are banks in there like ING Bank. There are retailers like Target. There are a lot of organisations out there that are starting to self-identify as technology companies or state their desire to reach a state where they are primarily driven by what they do in terms of the technology that they deliver. So they're recognising that the world software has eaten the world, if you like to use Mark Andreessen's very famous term, and that to compete and to survive and to thrive, we really need to harness our technological capabilities as organisations. Many of you on the call will be familiar with Simon Sinek's work. There's a TED talk about this. It's the golden circle, or the start with the why. So it's very important. We use it as a foundational stone, if you like, to describe what an organisation exists for. So some great examples out there. One that I like to use a lot from one of our customers, Saga. They exist to make the lives of retired people better. That's their own words that they've put together, and that is communicated throughout the organisation so that everybody in the organisation understands why they are there and what the purpose of the organisation is. Target operating models are not so concerned with the why. If you're familiar with the golden circle, you'll know that why is at the centre, and then we have the how and the what. The target operating model is about the how and the what. So we're going to explore that in more detail. This, if you like, is a operating model description. So under traditional IT, we've got the current operating model of many organisations that we work with. And on the DevOps column, we've got the target operating model for DevOps. So as you read through this slide, you'll probably try and self-identify which area of the chart or the table that you sit. And a lot of organisations still find that they're doing things in very big batches, that they're still arranging themselves around skills rather than around products or value streams, that they have central scheduling of work, maybe through projects, rather than allowing teams to practice their own organisation of work. They have very large releases that are a bit of a drama. So it may have things like release weekends where you'll have to come to work to handle the release. Information may be spread throughout the organisation, but maybe isn't very useful. In DevOps, we really love failure. We really embrace it as a learning opportunity. We try and take away all the negative connotations that through our lifetimes we've learned to associate with failure and start to see it as a path to success. And we're very focused on the value and flow in terms of the metrics that we look at. And we're very much kind of focused on a team of people understanding that the work is done when that value is being realised in the deployment state, not I've got my bit of the process and I've done my bit and now it's someone else's problem. We use this a lot as well to explain to organisations kind of where we need to aim for. So this is from Spotify. It's actually from their engineering culture videos that are very, very useful. We use them in a number of our courses. I've probably watched them upwards of 50, maybe even 100 times, and I still find new things in them every time I see them. But this particular chart is talking about the fact that alignment and autonomy don't necessarily need to be opposite ends of a line. You can have alignment, so you can have a shared vision across an organisation whilst having autonomy where people can choose how to do the work that delivers the vision that's been set. most organisations that we work with, when we look at this chart together, will identify themselves as being in that top left part of the quadrant. So where the chap's saying we need to cross the river and build a bridge. So they're all told to go off and do as they're told. And in the top right is where we want to be, where the green circle is. So, there's the vision. We need to cross the river. You guys, you've got the brains and the talent. You figure out how. So we're really talking about kind of the difference between command and control and distributed authority here. And what we find in a lot of the organisations that we work with that are more command and control-y, which, by the way, is a system that has worked quite well for many years, but it doesn't really fully optimise the talent that we have available in organisations. So we hear things like people saying we feel like we're treated like robots. We're just told what to do. We're not allowed to exercise our creativity or our ideas about how to do things better. So it's if you like, it's quite wasteful in terms of the human capabilities that we have on board. This chart here, or this table, is from a McKinsey report, which is about an operating model for scaling Agile effectively. Again, this, to all intents and purposes, the after column is a target operating model. It's just described in words. So we're saying things like we want to move from being application-oriented to product-based. So similar to what we saw in the earlier model, that we want to move away from having skill-based silos, but actually having multiple cross-functional teams focused around a product or a value stream. A very common one on this second line is around the proxy product owners. So we see this a lot. We're going to come back to this quite a few times, but certainly at the end of today. This is really it's kind of a symptom of a problem that we see in all organisations that are trying to adopt Agile. Agile tends to be adopted first by the technology organisations. It was originally a software and it is a software development methodology, and that's generally where it starts. But it does require constant feedback from the business. And quite often technology organisations find that hard to get. And that's partly because traditionally the IT departments have been seen as order takers. So to drive this level of respect and commitment from the business is quite hard. And I refer you back to that very first slide, are you a technology company? That thinking needs to happen throughout a whole organisation for the business to really get involved. And until the business is fully engaged, it's very hard for us to do Agile effectively. We need that product owner on board that really understands what needs to be done, really is there to prioritise and refine and check all the time. So as we said, self-organising teams there. And then this final one is really about budgeting and funding. So most organisations have an annual funding mechanism. It's quite often quite project-oriented, and it's very difficult to do things quickly in that scenario. So you're quite often spending money that you might have thought about up to 18 months beforehand. It's a very lengthy, painful budgeting processes that many organisations go through. So many of you will be familiar with things like Lean Startup. People also talking about kind of using things as bets, so making small bets and having MVP or minimum viable product to show that something works, and then taking a bit more money. So producing budget as we need it. Agile, of course, makes life a bit easier from a budgeting perspective because our costs are often fixed around the Agile team, and then we can budget in some additional costs as we think we might need it for additional training or tooling or additional resources as needed. So what exactly is a target operating model then? So we've learned a little bit about them already. We know that they're about the how and the what rather than the why. We've seen a couple of them expressed on tables just now. Lots of times when we think about operating models, though, we think about organisational structures. And as you've noticed, we have touched on the organisational structure being a key part of it. So we've talked about not having skill-centric silos, but actually having product-oriented teams. But the target operating model is not just about the organisational structure, although we are going to spend some time today looking at organisational structure as a key part of this. But again, to emphasise what we heard earlier, it's very much about the how. And that's from Capgemini, that information there. This chart here is from Julie Chu. So Julie, again, kind of emphasises that the operating model is different from some other models. So the mission model, if you like, is the organisational why. Then we've got business models and value models, and then we've got the operating model. There's quite a lot we could have a conversation about on this chart. I'm particularly interested in the kind of run versus change. So we have a current operating model, if you like, which is run, and then we have a target operating model, if you like, which is change. We're going to talk more about this run change thing as we look at the organisational structure, because it is quite a popular way of describing the difference between dev and ops as well. So a team at Ashridge have put together a book kindly pointed out to me by Andrew Campbell, one of the authors of this operating model canvas book. And they describe the components of a target operating model using this acronym POLISM. So P is for processes, the O for organisation, the L for locations, the I for information, the S for suppliers, and the M for the management systems. So these are the component parts that we need to consider when we're trying to work together to put together a target operating model. The way that Ashridge describe a target operating model is very much a visual collaboration tool to help managers gain clarity on what they're trying to achieve. So it provides a platform for debate and discussion and documentation of the ideas and the direction. So in that ways, you could say it's quite analogous to some of the tools that we have from the lean repository, if you like. So things like value stream mapping, Kanban, A3 thinking, they're all very similar in that they're visual collaboration tools. A3 thinking in particular very similar because A3 thinking sets out to have a single sheet of paper that explains all the important component parts of what we're trying to achieve. So this is the operating model canvas, blank from the team, Andrew, Michaela and Mark. And you can see here that we've overlaid, or they've overlaid, POLISM across it. So we've got processes in the middle, we've got organisation down the bottom on the left, we've got location top right, we've got information bottom right, suppliers on the top left, and then we've got the management system running underneath it. So this we're going to use to show you how to describe the target operating models that we currently see in information technology departments in traditional enterprises, and then we'll move on to our target operating model for DevOps in a moment. So let's just take a look at this one. So up in the top left, so you remember that was suppliers. Typically, large enterprises have very big vendor complex contracts relationships. They are currently often built primarily around data centers, and they often outsource a lot of their work, often development, tests, and ops, and they do that in a very kind of cost-centric model. On the top right, we can see some things around location. So we see a lot of physical separation. We see in the DevOps world, we see a lot of physical separation just between dev and ops, but then we also see further separation between different teams. That makes it quite hard to work together. We see lots of things happening like war rooms where people are dragged together when there's an incident. We see a lot of things like conference calls happening, which are not the best way to share information and collaborate together. On the process perspective, very waterfall, obviously, it's very large requirements documents, lots of change approval boards that people have to work through, often a lengthy test phase that often gets pushed out when the development overruns, then gets squashed, manual release processes which are very error prone and very nasty and very time consuming and very boring and tedious for lots of people to do. Everything's done big batch, which puts so much risk into everything and limits the way that we can obtain feedback loops. And funding is often very project centric, which makes it quite difficult to do things like continuous learning. It makes it difficult to innovate and have new ideas a lot of the time. On the bottom left, this is where we've got some organisational attributes. So in traditional IT, we've got a lot of project managers, we've got these skill-centric silos, we've got IT often being treated as order takers, and typically a command and control environment like we described a moment ago on the Spotify alignment autonomy model. On the bottom right, we have our information. So typically people are reporting on uptime, number of defects. The focus is really around getting cost reduction, getting return on investment, those kind of things. And then along the bottom, we've got our management system. So lots of spreadsheets and Gantt charts from those project managers, probably some kind of service desk or ticketing system. So that's the current model. Let's have a look at where we go when we go DevOps. So some quite significant changes. The suppliers model is very much now built around things like cloud and microservices containers, thinking about things like infrastructure as code, moving away from these very large contracts and thinking much more about partnering and building on collaboration. So from the Agile Manifesto, you'll know that we rate collaboration over contract negotiations, for example. There's still probably quite a lot of outsourcing, but if we have a value stream approach to life, that outsourcing becomes less of a problem because we're really understanding how value is flowing through a system. And it doesn't really matter so much then who's doing what work. In terms of location, in an ideal world, we would always co-locate Agile teams, but we work with a lot of organisations, particularly the big banks, where that isn't always possible. But there are some great collaboration tools out there, and I don't mean the conference call tooling, great collaboration tools that can really help. So I've mentioned ChatOps there, so if you use an instant messaging tool like Slack or Skype or HipChat or Stride, you can integrate that into your systems. It's really powerful, particularly around things like incident management, swarming around an incident, and also around things like just a development team or an Agile team watching when something goes through a deployment cycle. Lots of tools like Confluence, for example, that really help with the knowledge sharing, so getting that stuff out of people's heads and making it available, and then having things like healthy retrospectives rather than having these painful war rooms. From a process perspective, we're really breaking the waterfall big batch approach and going for little and often. We want this product backlog that we can get sprint backlogs from, that we want these user stories, everything broken down into nice small pieces so that we can work on it quickly. We can test and release things quickly as well. Moving away from cabs and into peer-reviewed change. We want self-service rather than having to wait for somebody to build us something that could take weeks. And we've got experimentation and continuous improvement built into everything that we do and our approach. On the bottom left, talking about the organisational models, as we've already touched on a couple of the other slides, we're really talking about self-organising and having cross-functional teams. We really want to look at the way that we lead. So if we're going to distribute authority, so break that command control structure, we need a different type of leader. We need a leader that is a transformational leader, that can inspire, coach, and be a servant leader. We need to be close to the business as well. So we need to have those product owners embedded, and we need to embed learning into everything that we do. That needs to be a priority for us to compete long term. In the bottom right, when we're thinking about the metrics or the information that we're interested in, we're really moving away from things like uptime and defects. So the business doesn't really care that much about the uptime of the system, the defects. They just want it to be up and there to be very few defects. What they're really interested in is the time to value. So how quickly can we start recognising the value of an idea or improvement that we want to make? And getting away from cost-cutting, instead thinking about capacity injection. So if we automate that thing, then we can do 12 times as many changes, which is 12 times as many value outcomes, for example. And we need to break that model of the annual funding and move to continuous funding model. And then we've got a lot more management systems going on. So we've got our DevOps pipeline, we've got a DevOps dashboard that's telling us real time what's happening. We are using CI and CD to make sure that everything is tested at the earliest possible point, that quality, security, and compliance are all built in. And then we have the ability to measure our velocity and how long it's going to take us to produce something. Here's another example of a DevOps target operating model for traditional enterprises. This is from Jagadish from Rolls-Royce. The link to his LinkedIn article is in the slide notes. And you can see here some of the themes that we've already looked at. So we've got waterfall going to agile. We've got some security considerations around compliance and identity and access control. We're talking about configuring environments and trying to automate that. We're trying to move away from manual fulfillment where possible. We're considering things like release management and services introduction and service transition, and we're trying to move towards self-service. So let's drill down, as I said we were going to, a bit more into the organisational piece of this. So this is a description, a visual description of what a traditional IT organisation looks like from a structural perspective. So you'll probably recognise this, the CIO at the top, and then the two parts of the organisation, Dev and Ops, siloed away from each other. You can imagine the wall of confusion that sits between those two parts as we do things like throw over code to be released, for example. And then you can see even more silos with our skill-centric groups of people. So we've got our project management office and BAs, we've got dev and DBAs and test all separated out. We've got security release and infrastructure support. Many of the organisations we work with look a lot more like this, actually, and there's lots more different kind of scenarios in terms of departments. But for the purpose of kind of describing the evolution that an organisation goes through when they're moving towards that target operating model and that target organisational model, we're going to just work with this smaller group. So typically the way that DevOps starts in an organisation is it's normally just kind of one or two people that kind of almost like wake up and decide that there is a better way of doing things, and they discover this whole world of DevOps and this whole set of principles and practices in terms of improving the way that we work and the way that we deliver work. So that's that person there that's gone green. I put that person purposefully in the test team because quite often that's where it starts. Even though you would think, test's not really dev or ops, why are they so interested in DevOps? Well, as I described a moment ago, in that waterfall model where we've got a large fixed test phase, it's often those people that feel a huge amount of pain because they're waiting for this thing that's overdue, and then they're still expected to deliver it on the date they were originally, even though they've got less time. So quite often those people feel the crush in that traditional model the worst. So as DevOps spreads, you've seen the arrow up the top right there just switched the way that it was looking. So it's kind of a recognition there that the organisation is starting to recognise the strategic importance of technology. But typically, the people starting to think about DevOps will infect the people around them, if you like, or certainly influence them, and the DevOps thinking will start spreading throughout the organisation, and other people will start to think about it as well. You'll see that the head of development went green there as well. In our traditional environments where we've got a lot of command and control, it's actually very important to have executive support for these kinds of initiatives. That's because those people have the authority and the budget to make this stuff happen. So even though DevOps often is a grassroots movement, it started as a grassroots movement, as the Twitter hashtag, and it's very much about distributing authority and allowing people to have autonomy, to have ideas and act upon ideas and drive things forward. In a traditional environment, we do need that level higher up the trees. So lots of people do this. So we've described this already, breaking down those skill silos and making them into product-centric teams or squads or scrum teams, whatever terminology you'd like to use. You can see there that we've got some red people now in those teams as well, and they're our product owners that we talked about a moment ago. So it's quite common for people to take this approach. So you can see we've got our product owners there, and then we've got our testers and our developers all embedded in the team. So we've got nice cross-functional teams now focused around delivering a thing together. You'll notice a couple of things about that it's the development teams that have done that, not operations. Agile is more of a software development methodology. We do have such a thing as Agile service management, which encourages operations to do a similar thing. We'll come back to that in just a second. There are some challenges, though, around this approach, and whether you call them product or value streams isn't hugely important. Just understanding what that thing is that team are delivering is important. And these challenges are recognised by people that take these kind of models. So again, learning from Spotify. Spotify call their teams squads. So you can see the squads there going with the POs at the top. And what they do is they create chapters, and they also create guilds. So the chapters are the common testers, for example, or the developers that have a matrix that they report along that line. And then the guilds are a looser organisation where you might have a DevOps guild, for example, or a continuous testing guild that anybody can join. So it's really about community and having the opportunity for those people to talk to each other. The reason that's important is in the skills-centric model, what it is really good at is sharing testing expertise with other testers, for example, and doing things like tool standardization. Like our testers use these test tools. Once you start spreading the testers out across multiple teams or squads, sometimes what can happen is they won't talk to each other so much anymore, and those best practices will start to dwindle, and they may all start choosing different tools. Tool standardization is a very emotive subject, so people have a lot of connection to their favourite tools and can get quite upset if they're told that they have to use another tool, so we have to be careful around it. Spotify talk about having a cross-pollination approach to it, where they just kind of let people use what tool they want, and over time, normally what happens is one tool will start to become the de facto standard without being necessarily forced upon people. That's a luxury that lots of the companies we work with can't afford. So we do have to think about that sensitively. So, of course, few organisations can do this overnight, even with the small number of people that we're showing in these example slides. Moving immediately to product-oriented teams, as we saw in the previous slide, is quite hard. So what happens with most organisations is that they'll actually experiment with one or two teams to begin with, and then start spreading it out as it begins to work. So, for example, an organisation might decide to develop a new mobile application and stand up an Agile team to test out how that works. And as they become more conversant and more mature with the way that they use Agile, they'll spread that out across the development organisation, and they'll want to start including operations people as well. So at this point, people are starting to think really DevOpsy. They're like, right, we've changed the way that we work in the development team, and you can see here that we're referring now to the development team as change, and the ops team as run, which is a fairly common pattern in lots of organisations. Some people address this problem about what to do with the ops people by building a DevOps team. So you can see there we've got a DevOps team now in the middle, and visualising it in this way in the slides really helps us understand why that might not be a great idea. And it's quite commonly thought of as being an anti-pattern, having DevOps teams, because as you can see, we've created effectively another silo here. That said, the State of DevOps reports every year an increase in the amount of people that are saying that they have DevOps teams. In 2017, it was up to 27% of the survey respondents. So you might ask yourself, if it's such an anti-pattern, then why are people still doing it? Well, it's kind of a good first step. These teams are often initially charged with doing things like focusing on automation. It's not a step that we recommend. We're very firmly of the opinion that DevOps is everybody's job, not one person's or one team's job. And when you create a DevOps team like this, you do give the impression that it's just those guys, they're the cool kids, they're the ones that are going to be doing DevOps, rather than allowing the whole organisation to really explore and benefit from DevOps principles and improvements. Some people embed operations staff into the various teams. It's hard to do that because different organisations have different amounts of operations people. We tried to run a survey many years ago to see if there was a standardised ratio between dev and ops people, and there isn't. So you might just not have enough ops people. You may have ops people with very specific skill sets around storage or networking or security. So we need to think hard about how to approach that. So you can embed them in the product development teams and try and kind of help those people in the IT operations teams work in more of an agile manner, so that they can start using things like product backlogs themselves or process backlogs, start using things like sprints. You could start assigning specific ops staff to specific product backlogs in the development teams. We see that a lot. There is a bit of a gotcha there, in that you really need to be very cognizant of the amount of resource you're committing. So sometimes what we see is ops people that have been aligned to multiple product backlogs, but the product backlogs haven't taken into account that. And actually, if you break down the amount of story points that are being assigned in a sprint to that ops resource across the multiple backlogs, there simply isn't enough room or time to do the work. But DevOps is very much an evolutionary movement. It takes time to spread across an organisation. A lot of learning has to happen. This is our second favourite question to ask our customers at the moment. So what does the future look like without IT? And we can tell quite a lot about the CIO and their response to this. So very forward-thinking CIOs are not scared of the idea of relinquishing all of their direct reports, because they understand that if they've done that, the organisation has put technology front and centre of everything that they do. The business and IT teams are now so tightly coupled together. They are working in these value streams together. So the whole business, and whether you say value stream or product, I don't think it really matters. Whatever you think is the best descriptor for the things that you're trying to deliver. So we've got a CDO up here, so a Chief Digital Officer, and an executive committee sitting up there. We're focused on delivery management. We do probably have some people that are a central service providing things like dashboards and aligning automation, so potentially some infrastructure squads there as well. So change sometimes looks scary and frightening, but I do like this quote from Alvin Toffler, a futurologist, that change is the process by which the future invades our lives. It can feel quite tiring trying to drive change sometimes, but if we kind of take a step back, we kind of know that it's going to happen anyway. The future is coming. It's kind of our choice as whether to ride the waves or try and push against it. So we're here to help. If you require any assistance with your DevOps Target Operating Model, we can help you work through that. We've been doing a lot of work specifically lately around what we call BizTech. So this challenge that I described earlier of getting the business properly on board with what we're trying to do in the technology teams, and really trying to get that connection across the organisation, and trying to head for that target organisational state that we've just described. So we've got a package of services described here. So this starting with the briefing with the CEO, so setting the context and gaining the support that we need. We provide coaching to do things like build the target operating model or models with the various parts of the organisation. We have a number of workshops I'm going to show you in a moment that are focused on the business rather than the technology units. We can help with the value stream mapping. So this is a thing that should happen often and regularly. So one value stream map on one value stream is not enough. It's a lean tool that helps us visually collaborate on where the waste is in a particular value stream. It's extremely effective at uncovering things that you didn't know, like the length of time it takes to do something, the amount of people that are involved, where the key constraints are. We also do lots and lots of Agile coaching specifically, so helping improve those maturity levels. We meet so many organisations that have been trying to go Agile for months, years sometimes, and have been doing it sort of off the basis of a few YouTube videos and a bit of what they've read on scrum.org. But Agile, although it's fairly simple to understand, or Scrum in particular, quite simple to understand, but very difficult to master. And different organisations have different profiles. That means that things need to be tweaked in slightly different ways. The Phoenix Project game we originally developed with Gaming Works, our partner in Holland, specialist games writers, to tackle this use case of getting the business involved. So it gets the business and technology people in a room working together on the Phoenix project. So it's a card-based business simulation, and great at breaking down these barriers and teaching us the principles around DevOps. And then we have a whole host of training courses around foundational learning around DevOps, DevOps leadership, continuous delivery architecture, DevSecOps engineering, DevOps test engineering. So lots and lots of ways to be on that learning journey and help empower all of the people across your organisation. So I mentioned we had some specific workshops, so we have a collection of them, and these ones are specifically to try and help the business people understand why technology are so into this thing called DevOps and what we need from them in order to support our progress there. So for things like the finance and legal people, having these conversations about how to control budget in an agile world, what continuous funding looks like, what it means to P&L and CapEx and OpEx and the way that we manage cash flow. how to measure impact, making these best bets, and then HR people really talking about moving away from annual appraisals, but talking about how to motivate people and how to reward people and create an environment where they feel that they have autonomy and mastery and purpose. The marketing and sales people, in particular, we can do lots of things around things like A/B testing and making experiments and getting customer feedback really close, having a real-time view of the impact of something that we've just delivered. And then for customer service, again, getting closer to the customer, enabling us to do things like very Kanban things like pull the customer requirements through first. Then we have a whole set of workshops that are intended to help the business people become more agile themselves. So actually teaching HR to operate in an agile manner. So teaching them how to run product backlogs and how to use sprints, how to break down annual appraisals into much smaller and much more regular chunks, for example. So that was the journey I wanted to take us on today around DevOps target operating models. I have some time now for some questions, if anyone has one. I have none open at the moment, so now's the time to put them in the control panel Q&A area if you should like to ask something or comment on anything that I have just said. So I have one question that's come through, which is about value stream mapping. So the question is, how do you do value stream mapping with a bunch of people that are in separate places? That is quite a tough one. I'm guessing when you say separate places, you mean like very geographically dispersed, probably different countries. With value stream mapping, we would always prefer to have people in the room together. So I know it's hard and there is a cost associated with moving people around. Value stream mapping, it's also a tool that we use at quite a senior level. So we've had examples where we've had the whole SLT from a small financial services company, for example, in a room for 4 days. So that's our preferred way to run value stream mapping, is actually across 4 days. So 2 days doing current state and 2 days doing future state with a gap in between. Many organisations find it difficult to commit the staff time to doing that. So we do quite often get pushed to do one in a day, and that's really hard and impossible really to get anywhere close to the future state. There's still value in it, but we would prefer to do it a bit longer. I guess you could try and use things like video conferencing, but we would not really recommend that. If you're going to make the commitment to take the time to really try and figure out what's going on in a value stream, I would get to people in the same room. So another question, what are you finding is the business's perspective on DevOps? So you'll have noticed a moment ago that we used the words DevOps and the word Agile when we talked about the workshops. The business, from our current experience, is DevOps is still quite a new concept to the business, and what we're seeing is more understanding about what Agile is. So we're quite often in businesses asked to talk Agile when we're talking outside of the technology department, whilst we get people on board. With many of the organisations that we're working with, though, we are doing things like the Phoenix Project game that I've just described, and also things like the DevOps Foundation course in particular, encouraging representatives from the business to be in those classes as well, to gain that learning through it. And yes, there are always some fairly technical conversations about automation and continuous integration, continuous delivery, but you might be surprised with how interested the business people actually are in those conversations. But there is also an awful lot of DevOps, things about DevOps, particularly around culture and measurement, that the business are really, really interested in. So the business wants to understand the best kind of collaborative behaviours and how to work together. And when we are talking to technologists about the best metrics to use, where we nearly always end up is that the metrics need to be focused on value, and that's where the business people can really come in and help us gain some clarity on that. So I don't see any more questions coming through. So I think we will say thank you very much for your time this afternoon. I hope you enjoy the rest of your days wherever you are in the world. You know where we are if you need a hand, so do get in touch. Thank you very much.